Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd.
On today's episode of the Sumúd podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Palestinian American Aline Batarseh, the Executive Director of Visualizing Palestine, which uses data and research to visually communicate Palestinian experiences to provoke narrative change. In my opinion, serving Palestine and humanity has been at the center of Aline's mission. She has not only demonstrated that as a leader of Visualizing Palestine, her track record proves it. Having worked with several Palestinian and international nonprofits at the intersections of gender equality, reproductive justice, children's rights, mental health, and social justice. Angela Davis once said, "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time." And that is exactly what Aline does all the time. Aline, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ed. It's a pleasure to be here.
So a lot has changed since we met in August 2023, right? Where we were talking about Palestinian discrimination in the workforce. I don't think either of us had imagined that we'd be experiencing this right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And I mean, of course, this has been, the case for many, many years, but it has come to the forefront much more fully over the past few months. And we've seen what it means, especially for, I'm lucky to work at an organization where, we're all, we all understand the context and we work for change of narrative on Palestine, but a lot of other people don't have what we do, right? And they work in places that have stereotypes that are quite entrenched, especially in a place like the United States. So yeah, a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, and you have a unique perspective because you were actually born in Jerusalem, correct? So you've gotten to live in both worlds within Palestine and within the U.S. Can you tell me a little bit about your history? Because it's fascinating to me. Your dad is Palestinian Arab. I hope I get this right. Your mom is Palestinian Armenian. Is that accurate? Is that the right phrasing?
Yes, that's correct. And I think, identity is interesting and it's complex, and a lot of people, can identify the way that they like. But, so my mother's family, they have always lived in the Armenian quarter in the old city of Jerusalem. And their family are called, so in Armenian, they're called Karakatsi, which literally means indigenous. So they're indigenous to Palestine and have been there for centuries. So they're part of the Armenian community that has been living in Palestine for centuries. And there are Armenians who came to Palestine in 1914 as a result of the genocide, the Ottoman genocide. But my family, my mother's side of the family, is not part of that history, but of course, our histories are interconnected. And so many of those Armenians went through the Nakba again in 1948 and were displaced. So they've experienced multiple traumas, as many people do, My father's family is Palestinian Arab, and they used to live outside of the old city until in 1948 they were actually displaced and had to they found shelter with the Catholic Church in the old city in Jerusalem. So then both my parents were born and raised in the old city. So we're a very Jerusalemite family, basically rooted in Jerusalem and in Palestine.
Can you speak to a little bit about, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Palestinians or Palestine opened the doors to Armenians during the genocide. Is that an accurate framing?
That's correct. And actually, so Armenians, what happened is that they went on a death march, basically. So many of the Armenians that were forced to go on this death march ended up in the Middle East. So many of them ended up in Syria and in Lebanon and in Palestine. And in Palestine specifically, a lot of them ended up in Jerusalem. And for the longest time, Jerusalem, the convent or in Jerusalem was basically full of, priests and people who were there to do pilgrimage. So it wasn't actually like a place of residence for Armenians. The Armenian quarter was, but not the convent itself. And so the convent really absorbed many of those Armenians who came as a result of the genocide.
So you have that struggle inherent in you on both the Palestinian side and the Armenian side, which shows why you have so much resilience. Is that fair to say?
Um, yes, I guess so. I think this is, part of what has shaped me and my identity. I think is definitely that background, the background of being exposed to multiple injustices, over the years. But I also think that, people, different people interact with those kinds of injustices in different ways, and my way and my purpose in life has really been to confront those injustices. And, even when I worked with Palestine, I really wanted to feel, that I was contributing to change, right, in society. And, as human beings, in general, there are multiple injustices, that we experience or that we see around us. And I've always been predisposed to struggle against this and these multiple layers of injustices. Whether it's when we're looking at gender or race or even sexual identity, or all of these things are, or even looking at the environment and the climate justice issue, um, even looking at the US, where we have Black Lives Matter as something really important and present in our lives with the racism that continues to be pervasive. So I've always seen those multi layers interconnected. Even at a very young age in school, I would see it and I would call it out. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure, is it because of the background? Is it because of just the way I am? I'm a highly sensitive person, which I don't see as something negative. I know a lot of people see that as negative, but I am also, hyper aware of what's happening around me
Yeah,
as a person.
you're super caring, and it was very clear when I met you for coffee. You really care about the cause.
Thank
So
you.
you're also Christian, and I think that there is this misunderstanding or misconception. I shouldn't even say that, actually. It's not a misconception. It's driven on purpose, right?
Mhm.
Through a political lens, that this is an Islamic issue, or Muslims versus Jews. In fact, Christians are being impacted and are standing side by side by the Muslim Palestinians as well, right?
Absolutely, of course. And I, for I think it's very important to say that this is a political issue. It's not a religious issue. Israel likes to paint it as a Jew, like Jewish Muslim, and it's not. It's a very political issue. Colonization is a political issue. So there has been a process of colonization for the past 100 years. And that doesn't look at religion. It's not about religion. Israel uses religion as a way to justify the colonization. But we also know that not all Jews are Zionists, right? Not all Zionists are Jews. Some Zionists are Christians, especially in the US. We know that, as people who are exposed to the political situation here in the US, that also there are many Christian Zionists who could also be anti-Semitic, by the way. But even if we want to look at Balfour, he was racist. He did not want Europe to be full of Jews. So it's really unfortunate that this is the framework that we're exposed to the situation through this lens. In reality, at the end of the day, there were Muslims, Christians, Jews that were Palestinians that lived in Palestine and that lived together. And I don't want to, paint the rosiest picture. Of course, there are challenges in every society, and that's fine. But at the same time, there are, to us, for sure, and for me as a Palestinian, first and foremost a Palestinian. Um, my background is Christian. I was raised and I was born into and raised by a Christian family, but that in no way really defines who I am, actually, because we're not a religious family. We happen to be Christian, but we're not a religious family. And so my mom will not be happy with that statement. She is. But definitely, within my smaller family right now, we're not too. So I've often had my children ask me, are we Christian? Are we Muslim? What do we celebrate? These are questions that I've been asked by my kids as they were growing up. So that's not. This is a justice issue. This is an issue about human rights, about injustice, about people being denied their dignity, their humanity, their rights to live fully as themselves and realize their potential in life. This is what this is about for me, and I think for many others. Some people might be driven towards the cause for other reasons, of course, but that's definitely not the case for me and for many of us, I think, as well.
So if your mom is listening to this podcast, I did not tell Aline to say any of that, just to be clear. I don't want to get in trouble with your mom, okay?
Yeah.
Are you able to, growing up in a Christian household, are you able to speak to the experience living in Jerusalem as a Christian, how you interacted with the community, let's just say the friendly community, and how you were treated from the Zionist community? Let's frame it that way.
Okay. Okay. That's a really big question. So first of all, as a Palestinian Christian, Christians are a minority in Palestine in numbers, but we've had huge contributions to Palestinian society, I would say, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. And to be honest with you, most of my friends, most of my neighbors, are Muslim. My classmates were mostly Muslim. I mean, the majority of people that are in our lives are Muslim because the larger society and community is Muslim. So besides differences in religious practices, and so these are not differences that define our relationships with people. So we're very much part of, our cultures are the same. I would say there are no differences in terms of the level of hospitality, the way we live our lives, the way we interact with people. I will say that there is no difference in the way that Israel implements its policies of colonization, settlement expansion, and apartheid. They have over the years tried to fragment Palestinian society, not just Christians and Muslims, but obviously we know that East Jerusalem has a different legal system. We're exposed to civil law, whereas in the West Bank and Gaza, they're exposed to military law, and Palestinians who have Israeli passports can vote, in elections, in Israeli elections. So they've imposed that kind of fragmentation on Palestinian society. They've also tried to impose that fragmentation on Christians and Muslims, where, for example, I would be crossing a checkpoint at some point they would be like, oh, if you're Christian, you can pass. If you're Muslim, you can't. They've tried to do that kind of separation, but in reality, we're all, this is all done by design, right? It's done by design, and we see it. I would say most of us see it. Of course, the bigger problem is that actual physical fragmentation that Palestinians have gone through over the years, because our struggles, and of course our overall struggle is the same, but our struggles in East Jerusalem are slightly different than our struggles in the West Bank. They're different than the struggle in Gaza, especially now in a situation where Palestinians in Gaza have nowhere to go, and they're literally exposed to mass extermination and genocide. This is happening in other parts of the West Bank and Jerusalem, but it's not at the same level. It's not in the same pace, and it's done through different tactics. The tactics are not necessarily the same, So this has all been done by design, and and we feel it and we know it. Um, yeah, so really, I would say that it's a situation of very clear segregation. Growing up, I've the interactions that I've had with Israelis is really, either through checkpoints or the health system or banks, or but even banks. I mean, the banks in East Jerusalem are all run by Palestinians, or have Palestinian employees in them. So we don't even have to interact beyond that military level. So it's a very clear colonizer versus colonized interaction. And there is no social interaction, barely. There might be some, with Palestinians who have Israeli passports, but even there, I would say it's quite limited.
And the threat of stealing property and land, if I'm not mistaken, there is an Israeli Australian, I hope I'm phrasing it correctly, that is attempting to take land from your family.
Not my family directly. So yeah, there has been, and I don't know the full details of like the exact percentages and all of that, but there is an area. So in the old city is, right now divided into different quarters. There's a Christian quarter, Muslim quarter, Jewish quarter, Armenian quarter. The Armenian quarter and the Jewish quarter are right next to each other, and some of the property from the Armenian quarter has been taken over by the Jewish quarter. It's happened in other quarters as well. This is not just a situation that's exclusive to the Armenian quarter, but it's happened in other quarters. And there is a very active effort to colonize and to take over all of the old city quarters and to make them exclusively Jewish. There is an area in the Armenian quarter that's called the Cow's Garden. It was basically this huge parking lot that belongs to the Armenian quarter. And there is this Australian Jewish developer that, it's a long story, but he actually made a deal with the Armenian patriarchate and bought that land. And then when the Palestinian community found out about this, they had this, they had this argument with the Armenian patriarch about, why did you do this? Anyway, they went through all this whole legal struggle, and they rescinded the deal. But right now, the Armenians in that area are exposed to almost daily settler violence. There are settlers who come and who are trying to take the property over. There are people who have set up, Armenians that have set up encampment in that area to resist and protect the area from being stolen. So it's a long story. Um, but yeah, it's part of it's part of Israel's strategy to take as much land as possible and get rid of as many people that are non-Jewish as possible. And this includes, whether you're Arab Palestinian or Armenian Palestinian or whatever your background is, really. So, and also I would say that in that area, the priests are very clearly, they're always wearing their the clothes that distinguishes them. They're spit on regularly by Israeli settlers. So there's that tension there that's quite constant. And of course, it's even done at a more extreme level in the West Bank, where you actually have burning of homes and cars and of olive trees and uprooting of, you see that happening at a more extreme level in a society also where, you have our society has traditionally been dependent on agriculture, right? For livelihood, and that was, I think, 80% of our society historically. And over time, Palestinians in the West Bank have lost their land to Israeli Jewish settlements, and now many of them have been forced to some of them have been forced to work as laborers in those settlements because they've lost their main means of livelihood, which is their the agriculture. So we see this kind of structural violence on many levels, by Israel, and it's also done intentionally to prevent Palestinians from working together in unity, right? Because when you fragment people like that, it's so hard for them to come together, and to resist, their situation, and yet we do see, resistance on many levels, including just by existing. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
that's one form of resistance, but of course there are many other ways.
Of course. And a lot of people, just going back to the Christian component, a lot of people, the one person I look up to till this day, I'll never forget, she gave a talk at my university many years ago. I was Hannah Shrawi.
Yeah.
There are many other prominent individuals, but she's been, I believe, the most outspoken, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but she could be prime minister. Well, if they can make it happen. That's me saying it. That's not you. Just making it clear.
Yeah,
Uh,
she's amazing.
She
Yeah.
is. She is. So I know how it feels with the majority of Muslim countries not being supportive of Palestinians or Palestinian Muslims. I know that really breaks my heart and that crushes me.
Mhm.
It's a little bit different, though, with the United States because you have Christians. Of course, they could be different sects of Christianity, but you have those individuals who are not supporting you, even though you're Christian. They're only saying you're Palestinian and there is no in between. I'm just curious, if you're okay with it, how does that make you feel?
Um, I mean, in general, I don't think that people should support a cause just because of their religion. Like, I don't expect an American Christian to say, "Oh, we need to support Palestine because there are Palestinian Christians." To me, that's not the right reason to support. To me, the right reason to support is that there are humans being exposed to extreme forms of structural violence, and we have a role to play, especially as Americans, with all the funding that goes to Israel and the support. We have a role to play to prevent this. So I think I would look at it that way more. I think it's a bit disturbing to me actually when the religious component is brought in. Um, of course, I know that for some people that's the way, to humanize the situation, but I don't want, someone to support Palestine just because they connect with me, because they think there are Christian Palestinians. And of course, I do think that there's important advocacy to be done, at the church level. If for any reason as Christians they should support this cause, is you know, because Christianity itself, if we want to look at Jesus Christ, who came, basically was fighting injustice, at the time, then that should be their role model. If
Yeah.
anything, that should be the reason, and not because it's a Christian issue, or that kind of yeah, that kind of perspective bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, no, fair. And what happened to separation of church and state too, by the
I
way?
know. I know, exactly. Yeah, and I think, it's really not true,
I
right?
can't remember who the representative was who wore the Israeli fatigues, military fatigues. I don't know if you got to see that. I can't remember his name, but he actually donned a Israeli military uniform.
I think that was a few months ago, right? Am I thinking?
I feel like it was end of 2023, but I could be wrong. Like
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love visualizing Palestine. The work that you all are doing, I feel, is underappreciated, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. And I'll never forget. I think it was LinkedIn where visualizing Palestine content was suggested to me. I wonder why. On the LinkedIn algorithm, and I'm like, whoa, this is good stuff. They're building a story. They're doing their research for us, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but you're sort of dumbing it down for us too, right?
I mean, some people, it depends who you talk to. Some people are like, "Can this be simpler?" But
Yeah,
yeah, I guess, you talked a little bit about the mission of visualizing Palestine at the beginning of the podcast, but yeah, we launched in 2012 with the first visual or the first infographic that was on hunger strikes. And at that time, we wanted to bring attention to the hunger strike that um, Khadr Adnan, what he was, I think, on his 66th day of hunger strike. And we wanted to bring attention to this form of civic resilience, basically, a resistance, sorry, uh, towards a political system, an unjust political system, right? And unjust circumstances, imprisonment circumstances. So, and I don't know if like people know, but administrative detention is basically detention without charge or trial, and Palestinians can be in administrative detention anywhere from 6 months to like basically dozens of years, you
Yeah.
know. And so it's a really extreme form of detention. So we wanted to bring attention to this form of resistance, but also to shed light on uh, the context that this has not just happened in Palestine. Other people have used this as a form of resistance, including Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, and others. And so from the very beginning, visualizing Palestine's work was centered on, okay, we want to bring attention to data. What happens to the body, right? When you're going through hunger strike. And also we wanted to tell stories, right? So because data alone and numbers alone don't really mean much. What brings meaning to the numbers is people's stories, is people's experiences. And so we wanted to both bring attention to, there's a lot of data on Palestine. People can do their research. If they want to learn, they can read, UN reports, human rights reports. There are lots of human rights organizations based in Palestine and elsewhere that you know, do really good research on Palestine. And our work is to communicate it visually for those people who don't want to read, 30 pages or 100 pages of reports. And we focus on different themes and bring attention to the different, to various issues through those themes. So yeah, and we've, over the years, I think I would say we're close to 300 visuals since, the beginning of our establishment on, very important narrative interventions that we've wanted to introduce to the world, that other people and organizations in the liberation movement have also been talking about. So, settler colonialism and apartheid, and the Nakba and the ongoing Nakba, which is not really a word that Americans are used to because they don't learn about it in school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm sure that I know you have children as well, and I'm sure they don't learn about it in school and have not been exposed to it. I think their yours are younger than mine, but I see my daughter who's a junior, and she doesn't learn about this at school.
Yeah. Well, I have a whole conversation with you about schooling, so we're going to get there for sure.
Okay.
Just FYI, really quick, Wise sent me a message. The representative's name was Brian Mast, a Republican in Florida,
Okay.
who donned that uniform. So I find the work that you all are doing is so important because there is sort of this nexus of academic rigor and arts or storytelling. Can
Mhm.
you kind of walk through the process? I know there's like a wheel and all that, but could you simplify the process for the audience so they can understand and appreciate the effort that goes into this?
Yes, I know. I've talked about this in this way before. I tell people, how when you see like a dance performance and it's like the very, you see it and it's like, oh, this is beautiful. It looks effortless, but it takes months to, for the dancers to perfect the dance, right? And I would say it's a similar process for the production of visuals. So we always start with an idea, a theme. We say we want to cover this theme. What do we want to talk about, within this theme? Of course, some of them are quite huge themes. So let's say we want to cover the situation in Gaza, right? And the genocide in Gaza is one of our the ongoing themes this year, because it hasn't ended. It's very important to keep bringing attention to it, because people are also paying attention and want to learn more. So, and then we say, okay, what is not being covered, right, by others? What is not being covered by the media? What is not being covered by other organizations? What do we need to bring attention to? So we zoom in on a specific issue. So, for example, behind me, you'll see there's like, this is actually a series of 3 visuals. And we wanted to talk about the original villages of Palestinian refugees who are living in Gaza and where they come from. And in 1948, for example, more than 750,000 Palestinians were displaced and lost their homes. More than 200,000 of them ended up in Gaza, and they ended up in 8 refugee camps. So we wanted, to show those original refugees, or those original villages that Palestinians in Gaza today, 80% of whom are refugees, cannot go back to, and how they are being internally displaced again, in Gaza. So the way that we do it is, we look at the issue, we do the research. This one involved mapping, because we wanted to map all the original villages, and we used data from Salman Abu Sitta's amazing research, to bring attention to those numbers and the maps. And then there's the creative process. Once we do the research, once we write the brief, once we decide what the data hierarchy is, all of this information is then handed over to a designer. And the designer comes up with the creative concept. Sometimes our researchers, and I have to say, I have really amazing colleagues who've been doing this for a long time. And Jessica Anderson, who's also the deputy director at BP, has been doing this research for the past few years, and really is the one who comes up with all those briefs and detailed research. And sometimes we get outside help as well, but she's been the one who's been doing those research briefs. And then it's handed over to one of our designers, and then they come up with a creative concept. Sometimes they come up with more than one creative concept. And we discuss it internally, and it's taken from there. So really, the process could take from a month to 3 months. When October happened, we had to kind of shift pace a little bit, because we wanted to bring attention to some of the data much faster. So some of the visuals we were working on within a week. So for example, you'll see behind me this New York Times ad that we did with Empower Change, and that we worked on within a week. And within that 1 week, the data was changing continuously every day, and we had to lock in the number of people killed, including the number of children. At that time it was 6,700. Today it's more than 40,000. And so that process, for example, was just 1 week, but typically that's not how much time things take for us. They take much longer. The research is also, it depends on the type of research, the type of information that we're including in a visual. Sometimes data statements literally take us 1 week,
Yeah.
But if it's a data statement with a story, with, mapping, for example, of, so many villages, original villages, then it takes much longer, because we're very meticulous about how accurate the information is. We're also something that people don't always see, because people see our visuals on social media. If they go to our website, people will also see the sources that we've used in the making of that visual. And that's very important for us as well, because we want people to have access to the data and to be able to do additional research and to read more about the issue that's being visualized, because we can't the visual doesn't tell the full story. It tells part of the story.
Yeah. And I remember the New York Times one, because when that came out, as you can imagine, I get a lot of haters coming my way. But I would just send that graphic to them and say, there's nothing complicated here. You see it. The data is very clear. The names are here. So I definitely appreciate it. If only you all would maybe collect all of this and put it into a book at some point. Have you thought of
Yes, it's coming. It's coming.
Can you talk
uh,
about that book a little bit?
yeah, for sure. So
I don't have the book, but I have the cover of it. Is that right?
yes, and I actually have the cover also in
Yeah.
the background here. So the book is coming out. So we're publishing a book. Let me take a step back. We're publishing a book. It's coming out, and it's being published on September 3rd in partnership with Haymarket Books. It's called Visualizing Palestine, A Chronicle of Colonialism and the Struggle for Liberation. And it's almost 400 pages, and it includes 200 plus of our visuals, the visuals that we've worked on for over a decade. And we have more than 160 contributors to the book. So different people who have worked on the research and the visualization and the designs of visuals. The book is divided into, I believe, 12 chapters. So the themes, we start with an introduction, but the themes focus on the main narrative shift themes that we've been working on over the years. So from settler colonialism to the ongoing Nakba, to recognizing apartheid, to navigating apartheid, to Gaza, to U.S. complicity, corporate complicity, the BDS movement, right? And also there are a few other sections as well on political prisoners and ecological justice. And also we have a specific section on special projects, which includes things that are not infographics, basically. So that section includes all the interactive websites that we've developed over the years, the animations that we've worked on, the counter mapping that we've done. So it includes projects that are not infographics, but also educational platforms that we've developed. So really it's a compilation of all of those years of work. So it's a mostly visual book. There's a very little text. So for people who don't want to read much but want, are visual learners, it's a really good gift book, I would say, to give to people who want to learn about Palestine, but also want to teach about Palestine. So yeah, that's the book.
Oh, that's great. And I think it's much needed. Is there a way to work with you specifically in the DC area? And I don't know if this would work with schools or libraries, but could I work with you to order a certain number of books and have them donated to the local? Because we're going to talk about education in a second, but
Absolutely.
if we could do something like that, I think that would be very important.
Absolutely. And we'd love to do that. That's a great idea. And I've been thinking about, getting this book to schools, to libraries, to universities. I think it's really important, to have the book in these contexts. And there are some that are obviously friendlier than others, but I think these are really important spaces because, in the environment that we live in, there is such pervasive misunderstanding and lack of knowledge on Palestine. And it's at the school level, it's on mainstream media level. And of course, let's not even talk about the politics, right? That's a whole other beast with special interests but also unfortunately, we live in a country that has a history of colonization. And so, I would want to see. I feel like we should have evolved past that stage, but we're still unfortunately seeing, a country that has a historically, historical colonization problem that is supporting another colonizer right now.
Yeah. So let's get a list going of libraries and schools and universities. Now, what you and I have to sort of bet on is how many of them are going to ban the book. That's
Right.
the question, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and we can work. We can work on that together as well, because I have some thoughts on how to challenge those, but yeah, we can talk about that separately.
Yeah, great. So visualizing Palestine has an end game. There is an end game. There is a goal at the end of this. And I sort of asked Mara Cronenfeld the same thing with UNRWA, right? There is a goal. They don't want to be in business forever, obviously, and saying it's business is wrong, but working on this forever. Hopefully, there would be a resolution. Can you kind of walk through visualizing Palestine's end game here?
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, we want our visuals to be obsolete, right? We don't want to continue to work on, at some point, we love, for this work to be just an archival record of, what got us to liberation. But yeah, we don't want to continue to do this kind of work. At the end of the day, our purpose is to change the narrative, to contribute to the liberation of Palestinians, but honestly, to the liberation of all peoples.
Yeah.
We don't. I personally, and I know I speak, on behalf of other team members as well. We do not believe that one person's liberation should be at the expense of another person's. And yeah, we're imagining collective liberation with the work that we're doing. So I would love, to be out of a job. I really would.
You can take over the podcast after that.
Yeah.
Does that work? Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, and none of us are in this kind of work because because it's a job, right? To us, it's much more than this. It's really about wanting to contribute to change, to awareness raising, to challenging, a mainstream narrative that has dehumanized Palestinians, that has painted a very wrong picture about who we are as a people, about the situation, about the context that we live in, right? I mean, I feel like whenever I'm exposed to mainstream media, I'm like, are they talking about like the situation as I know it? Because I feel like they're talking about something that I cannot relate to. This is how distorted it is,
Yeah, and I think you're playing an important role, and I think you could probably speak to this better than I could, given a lot of the writings that you've done and research you've done yourself. But the majority of pieces, if I'm not mistaken, that talks about Palestinians are written by non-Palestinians in most cases. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. I wrote an article, I guess last year. I feel like it's a much longer than last year, on just mainstream media and how Palestinian voices Palestinians are not the ones that are telling the stories, but also, honestly, there's even more recent. I don't know if you remember this. There was a leaked memo from the New York Times that The Intercept covered. I think it was a couple of months ago. Maybe it was in January, actually. And The Intercept published an analysis of the New York Times, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times and their coverage of the war on Gaza from October 7th to November 24th. So this is early on in the genocide. And at that time, the death toll of Palestinians had reached 15,000. And yet the New York Times described Israeli deaths as massacre. And on 53 occasions. And they've only described the killings of Palestinians as massacre once. So 53-1, right? And then the ratio of the use of slaughter was used 22-1. So it's really interesting. And then also the memo to journalists from the New York Times instructed them to avoid the use of words of genocide, ethnic cleansing, occupied territory, and actually, this is something that I haven't mentioned on a podcast before, but I'll mention it now. When we worked on the New York Times ad, we were asked not to use the word genocide. They refused. The New York Times refused to print the ad with the word genocide. So they actually told us that, you can say ceasefire now, but you can't say genocide. You can't say end the genocide. You can say ceasefire,
Wow.
So we were also censored, right? And yeah, we it's very clear for anyone who reads the New York Times the level of censorship that goes into words that are used, and also the voices that are covered, and who gets to tell the story. And it's for the most part non-Palestinians.
I think the powerful component of that graphic is you didn't even need a title, really,
Right.
if you think about it, right? I mean, the image itself was quite powerful. So
Right.
there is one, I don't want to call it an image, but interactive kind of item on your website, and I forgot the name of it. Lavender.
Oh,
The AI component, and how that's impacting the Palestinians across the world. I'm assuming not just in Palestine, maybe. But that was actually a very creepy and informative, um, I don't know, tool to go through, because I think you had to keep scrolling for it to pop up. So that was quite powerful. Can you speak to both the impact of AI and obviously what we're trying to get across with that one?
oof. Yeah, it's a really good question. I personally have a very complex relationship with AI. It freaks me out, just in general, even, not talking about this visual, but feeling that, you know, um, this the evolution and the dependence on AI and the misuse, right? And really with this visual. So we've done two visuals. The first visual that we worked on was on automated genocide, right? And Israel's use of AI to kill, to mass kill Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah.
With the interactive website, and I have to say, huge, huge thanks to an anonymous volunteer who worked on that website, because our team does not have the skills to actually work on interactive websites. And I know he doesn't want me to say his name, so I won't. But we, are so appreciative of the work that he's done on this, on a volunteer basis. And we really wanted to bring attention. This is actually based on a plus 972 article that was written on the misuse of AI and the use of lavender. And of course, there is a whole question mark around. First of all, with the use of this kind of technology, human beings are reduced to data, right? But with the use of this kind of technology, not only are Palestinians reduced to data, but really Israel has been surveilling Palestinians for years and has been using this data to discriminate against Palestinians. So it's not just now, it's not just recent, it's not just with the situation in Gaza, but literally Palestinians are reduced to data and they are being targeted in their homes. So this, those two, so that we have Lavender, which collects the data and does the analysis, and then we have another one called um, Where's Daddy, right?
Mm.
And this technology is used to target Palestinians when they're home, to kill them, and so they know that they're killing Palestinians in their households, right?
Okay.
But of course, this data is these systems are used to just have as many Palestinians as possible on a kill list, at the end of the day. And they don't care, are they children, are they adults? They also like the way that the data is misused, and even if it was accurate, it's not okay, right? But like the way that it's misused is that, they're tracking who are people calling, who are they people talking to, so they could be misidentifying journalists as combatants as well, and there's an example of that in the interactive that you'll see where this has happened in the past, where the US has done this actually in the past as well. So yeah, I encourage people to go to the website and explore that interactive website. It is really, really creepy, and it's also not just, as you said, it's not just used, and not that that's, I don't want to say just, it's used on Palestinians, but it's also Israel sells this kind of systems to other countries that are also using them to survey other communities and to again misuse the data.
Let's be clear here. They are using this to kill Palestinians.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You just summed it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was reading too. I don't remember the company's name, but even X.com or Twitter, where there was a verification process, but apparently that verification process goes through an Israeli entity to verify. So they're also collecting data that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really it's just yeah, and I guess, this is why the laws aren't fully developed, to prevent this kind of misuse, but it's really an area that um you know this should be completely outlawed, right?
Yeah, but you and I both know at this point, even things that are illegal are being done to Palestinians and to the Palestinian
Right.
diaspora. So I don't think, one
Yeah.
way or another, they're going to twist it to however, or bend it rather, however they like to bend it to work
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, just because I feel like, sometimes this kind of information is, just so heavy that people don't know what to do. On the website, there are several ways that people can take action depending on where they live, so we have several ways for people to, either in the US, for example, to really join a campaign to ask their representatives, not to send money to Israel and military aid to Israel, right? There is another one in the UK. There's also the No Tech for Apartheid campaign that people can join and support. So there are different ways that people can get engaged. And yeah, I want to make sure that we're giving the right message that, people have agency. We have agency as individuals, as human beings that are living on this planet and have, agency to speak out, and also the responsibility to speak out, especially if we are in places where our votes, our money is being misused to fund genocide.
well, can you imagine if this was China or even Russia doing this, the
Right,
uproar that would occur?
right.
So that's right on.
Yeah.
Since we're on sort of still the topic of data and media, what should our audience be reading, or who should we be listening to? Do you have individuals you would like to suggest? And not in any particular order. I don't want to put you on the spot there, but anybody you'd suggest?
Not at all. Oh my gosh, so many, I mean, I would say in terms of other organizations to follow and to support, several my go-tos are Institute for Middle East Understanding, IMU, Al Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, Makan, which has many educational resources. They're based in the UK, but they have amazing educational resources, and also use VP's resources, but they have their own. Just Vision would be another one, especially for films and documentaries that they've done on Palestine. But they're also affiliated to the Plus 972 Mondovice is a go-to for me as well. Palestine Deep Dive is another go-to. They do daily analysis and send daily emails out with, the most important reports and analysis, but also can be followed on social media. I think also really important to follow Palestinian citizen journalists, like Mu'taz and Bisan and Palestia and others, Jinan Matari on Instagram as well, Noura Ariqat and her analysis. There are so many. I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out, but these are some of the individuals and channels that I would encourage everyone to follow and to seek out that the information that they have on their pages.
You forgot to add yourself because you've written some very good articles. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you.
So let's talk about education. You moved from Palestine. I believe you made the conscious effort to move from Palestine with your family because of the situation there. And I believe, right? And
Correct.
in order to give them more opportunity and more freedom. But lo and behold, it's not so much like that if you're a Palestinian or if you're a Palestinian American.
Correct.
And I bring this up because I remember when we met for coffee last year, you told me a story that really broke my heart, where your daughter had a debate, I believe it was, with another student about Israel versus Palestine being on the map. And if I recall correctly, the teacher sided with the notion it was just Israel. Is that right?
Okay, so yeah, you have part of the story. Part of the story is correct. Okay, so this was a few years back when my daughter, who's now 16, was in elementary school. She actually, her teacher was talking about her background, right? And she was saying, she was an art teacher, and she asked the students to paint home, and she said, "Here's my home. She's Iranian, Jewish, and she also lived in Tel Aviv, and she said Israel." So my daughter was confused, and she's like, she's talking about Palestine. Why is she referring to it as Israel? So her friend, her classmate, told the teacher, actually, it's Palestine and not Israel. And the teacher basically, in front of the whole class, because my daughter's friend approached the teacher separately, not in front of the whole class. So in front of the whole class, she decided to say, there is a student who is saying that I did not live in Israel, I lived in Palestine. Well, look at the map. The map says Israel. And my daughter came home really upset, right? So I mean, and this is the problem with mapping, right? Who does mapping? And what are the countries that are represented on maps? It's the powerful countries that decide that. Even when we look at the modern Middle East today, we know that was carved out by colonizers. All the borders, the nation state concept, these are all new concepts, that were imposed on us. And so I actually decided to go and talk to the teacher, because I was like, you basically denied my daughter her identity. Like, even if you, let's say, believed whatever you believe and you identify to it as Israel, my daughter identifies to the place as Palestine, and you can't tell her it doesn't exist on a map. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and this is why counter mapping is important as well, right? Because part of the process is to erase, part of the process of colonization is to erase a place and a people and to change names of cities and towns, which Israel has been actively engaged in over the years. So this was the story, and I think that was just a very hyper, it brought to this, it had my daughter really, like, not question our identity, but I think really hold on to it more, actually, and to say, why are we being erased like this? It was very clear to her that it was a process of erasure at that age. I believe she was 10 or 11 back then.
Yeah, I mean, their hope was to erase Palestine from her memory. What they failed to realize is they actually activated it, I believe, at that point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what happens. So talk to me a little bit about the education component too. I know that your family or your daughter specifically helped lead a protest,
Mhm.
and there were a lot of conditions of that protest. I just want people to understand and feel, as a parent myself too, right? The feeling that you send your kids to school and they're not being taught about their culture or their history. They're being taught sort of this revisionist history, right? Kind of component. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So back in October, so we live in Fairfax County in the US and in Virginia, in case people don't know where that is. And at back in October, there was a countywide decision and approval from the supervisor to do a walkout for students in different schools. And it was actually led by the Muslim Students Associations at the different schools. They were the ones who took the lead, but also they were not, I think the way it was portrayed was, again, as you said, it's like, oh, the Muslim students are supporting Palestine, but in reality, it's just because there are no Palestine clubs in the schools. Not all schools have Middle Eastern clubs, so it ends up being the Muslim Students Association. But in the school where my daughter goes, it was done in partnership with the Black Student Union, with Amnesty International. So there were a few other clubs at the school that were co-sponsoring the walkout, and my daughter was one of the co-organizers, right? And she was immediately, the principal, I think, was getting, even though there was approval from the superintendent, sorry, the principal was getting complaints from some parents about the walkout. And so she called my daughter and another co-organizer in on several occasions. And it was a very demoralizing discussion, because she said, you cannot use the word apartheid, you can't use genocide, you can't use siege, you can't use these words because they're hate words. And my daughter was like, these are not hate words, these are words that describe the situation, and they're being used by human rights organizations, the UN. This is not, I'm not making this up. Of course, the principal did not want to have this discussion. And she was more concerned about the feeling that parents were having about their safety, the discomfort. So basically, she was more concerned about the discomfort of some parents over the actual pain that students like my daughter were experiencing because of loss of life of other Palestinians in Palestine, and actually a very non-violent walkout to end violence, against violence. And my daughter was being told that this is encouraging violence. Imagine, so it was really terrible. And my daughter was traumatized from that experience. And to be honest with you, it's also, there is no room to grieve. Um, we want to speak out against, and this is what they wanted to do. The students wanted to speak out against the violence that is happening to the Palestinian community, and they're being told that they are supporting violence by going on a walkout. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. And at the same time, many of them were losing family and friends in Gaza. My daughter herself has a really close friend in Gaza who had lost 40 of her family members earlier that week, when my daughter was organizing the walkout. So it's like, even that grief, there is they're prevented from coming face to face with it, because we have to constantly struggle for our right to be heard,
Yeah.
which should not be the case. But this, so this was her experience. It wasn't a good experience. They had the walkout in the end, and obviously it was 100% peaceful. There were actually students, there were parents Zionist parents there that were photographing and were taking videos of the students, and that I don't know how that was allowed.
High school students.
High
They're
school students.
taking video and
Yeah.
pictures of high school students.
Yes.
Can you imagine if it were the other way around, if you and I showed up doing that? I think we'd be arrested on the spot.
Honestly, I can't imagine. And I remember I asked my daughter, I said, should I come? Are you feeling safe? I was worried. I was like, this feels like a hostile environment. I said, are you feeling safe? Do you want me to come? And she said, no, parents should not be coming. And there were, so I actually was like, okay, I'll honor that and I won't go. And then there were parents there, that it's just, yeah, I was really livid, with when I found out that's what happened.
Were they bullying the students at all, saying anything, or was it just?
No, they were taking pictures, and I think it was more an intimidation tactic. We're here to record you in case something goes wrong, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would have showed up myself, but I would have done it in disguise, so nobody knows it was, I was the parent. But I would have, just to monitor the situation. You just never know. Some of these individuals are really doing some bad things, and you have to be very careful. So,
Yeah.
do you think your daughter is inspired by your work?
You should ask her that question.
I will.
I mean, I think definitely, we're all sort of, we look up to our parents, and we're impacted by the way they lead life, and so yeah, I would say I'm sure I have an influence, but yeah, I feel uncomfortable speaking on her behalf, so.
But are you telling her actively, hey, you have to stand up, you have to, or is it just kind of coming organically for her?
It's very organic.
Yeah.
It's been, who she is. You know, I think always standing up for others, and for, I mean, I feel like, she's involved in other initiatives as well, like really likes to go and, help the elderly in homes and stuff. So like she's just a really caring person, and I think that's just the way that she sort of looks at life, and also gives her fulfillment. So, she's pretty young still, but I think that, yeah, for sure the background makes, colors who she is, for sure.
Yeah, my twin daughters, they're very shy, except for when it comes to Palestine. So if they see somebody drinking Starbucks or eating McDonald's, they will say so. It's very actually fascinating. Like going into the mall or whatever, if they see it, why are you eating that? That's not good.
I love that.
But otherwise, they won't talk. They're very shy. So I really respect your view and your opinion, given your experience. A lot of parents don't have the experience you have, the knowledge that you have, obviously, the upbringing. What advice do you give to the parents right now across the US who are raising kids in these unhealthy environments?
Mm. That's a good question.
And I'm asking for myself too, just to be clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I hear from some parents is that sometimes their children don't even have the discussion with them. Like, I think definitely, I think we're at a stage where every Palestinian is proud. Like I don't know, but I feel like we are, especially over the past few months, some people were not even politically active. Now they're much more active because of the situation. I think definitely don't act out of fear, I would say, because I think a lot of people are afraid. I think when we look at the school system, and especially the public school system, these are, when we look at the superintendent or the board of education, these are people we elect, like these are, and I think, for me, it took me some time to understand that, because that's not the culture that, I've lived under military occupation. Like, I don't understand that kind of privilege,
Yeah.
but we have a privilege and we have influence, and we also have organizations that we can resort to in case our children are being discriminated against. I know you talked to Abed Ayub from the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. Definitely resort to them. There are others, that are doing really important work. Like, definitely connect with community is what I would say. If you're facing an issue, there are others in your school or in your community that have gone through something similar, you know? So, for example, there was a culture night in our elementary school. I reached out to a couple of parents that I knew who were Palestinian. They reached out to others. We did something together. You know, don't be afraid to reach out to others from your community or to others who have similar interests and experiences, because going through this alone is not easy. Um, I would definitely reach out to others in the community and have an open discussion with our students, and also encourage them to tell you stories, because I know, one of my children is not as, my younger one doesn't share as much. And then sometimes something comes up sometimes and I'm like, what happened? Why didn't you say this? Sometimes children are not aware also that something is happening that is not correct, basically, and that is an encroachment on their rights. Um so these are some, like, these are pieces of advice here and there, but I hope they're a little bit helpful.
No, it's great. And you saw, I think you commented on the post here of Rethinking Schools,
Mhm.
the magazine Rethinking Schools, and they had an edition of Teach Palestine, which my mouth dropped. I was like, wow, we are making a difference. This is working, and that's very powerful. I do have
Yeah.
a request, just speaking about this. Are
Mm.
you able to, and I hope nobody at your team gets mad at me for the extra request, but are you able to create an infographic or any type of graphic specifically for elementary, middle, and high schoolers, just for talking points? So more of
Mm.
a child's version, if you will.
Oh, this is such a good question. It's something I've been wanting to do, actually, but all of our visuals are really, the audience is, I would say, high school and above, and we've been talking about doing a visualizing Palestine kids, kids friendly. We don't have the resources, unfortunately, to do that. It's a dream that I have. I really want to do it, but we're not there yet. Yeah, with the limited resources, but I would love to do that.
Well, if you need interns, my the twin daughters will help you out.
Amazing.
It'll
Amazing.
be crayons, obviously, and a little sloppy, but I think it could work.
Well, no, it's
So,
great. Actually, just sorry, and but on the Rethinking Schools magazine, there was, I don't know if it's in the print version, but for sure in the online version, there are even more resources that people can go to. There's a really amazing resource that I actually shared with a social studies supervisor in one of the counties in Virginia, where um they're teaching the Nakba, and they're actually teaching it from, is this independence or is it Nakba, basically, so they're using, in that teaching resource, they're using some Israeli or primary documents and Palestinian primary documents to talk about the experiences of both, which is really important because right now we don't have the Palestinian perspective at all about what happened in 1948, in schools. So definitely for people, who want access to more resources, that is an amazing resource for people to go to. I'm also actually, which is something I didn't mention earlier, I'm involved with the National Arab American Women's Organization, and the Education Outreach Committee is part of that organization. And so we do outreach to counties on resources and on social studies and education in schools as well. So people can approach us as well if they need any kind of support, because we've done some of it too.
yeah. Speaking about resources, though, earlier with Visualizing Palestine, what's the best way for us to support you? I'm a member. I believe I still am a member, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, and I will forever, as long as this happens, it keeps going. But how do we support you? Because again, I really do believe that you all are underappreciated and maybe not as known as you could or should be with the work that you're doing. How do we support you?
No, thank you, Ed. Great question. So first of all, definitely please use our resource. A lot of people already do, use our resources. Everything that's on our website is downloadable for free. Our main goal really is to make all this information accessible. So everyone can download the visuals. Everything is, we use Creative Commons licensing, which means that people can use our visuals as long as we're credited. They don't change, they don't modify the visuals, and as long as they're not used for commercial purposes. So they're there for education and awareness raising. Please use them. In terms of support, I read this article recently that really resonated with me, and it's about similar types of organizations like VP, where what we're doing is we're providing resources, right? Where if we did not exist, those resources would not exist. There aren't that many organizations of course, I've mentioned some of the really amazing resources out there, but there aren't organizations in our space that do what we do, you know? And I would say, and this article was saying that people only realize how important these organizations are when they don't exist, right? And we don't want that to happen. There's a reason why we exist, and I think people are very supportive of humanitarian aid which is very important. But I think if we want to look at the long-term change that we want to do, we want to radically change the situation, right? We don't want Palestinians to be continuously dependent on aid and on services. We want freedom at the end of the day. And this is what we're working towards. So the long answer short, people can support in different ways. We have a membership program where people can sign up as recurring donors on a monthly or yearly basis. And the reason it's important is because we're actually we're 80% reliant on individuals. We have some foundation support, but it's not that's not the core of where our funding comes from. And the idea is that we are producing visuals for the community, supported by the community, and we don't want to be censored in any way by anyone who tells us you can say this, you can't say that. It was enough with the New York Times ad, but beyond that, we don't want anyone to control our messaging. And so it's very important that we're supported by our community, and people can support at any level, whatever is comfortable for them, because at the end of the day, we're powered by people, by community members. So that's what I would say. Of course, people can do one-time donations as well, but memberships are more help us sustain the work that we're doing until hopefully we don't have to anymore.
Yep. I just want to throw out there that I missed the trivia games that you all put together a couple of times.
Oh,
You got to do that again.
Yeah. It's actually, I'm going to be on a podcast next week that will be using trivia games, like five trivia questions. Maybe this is too much of a sneak peek. I shouldn't have mentioned, but anyway, that's happening next week. But yeah, it's yeah. I'm really glad. I forgot that you participated in that one.
Yeah, I did pretty good until the very end, and then I can't remember. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I was Googling a lot of the answers because I just didn't know.
That's fine.
But yeah, but yeah, no, that was, and I learned a lot that I just didn't know about our history and our culture. So I think it was amazing.
Yeah. And I think, and that's okay, because there's a lot that we don't know, because there is a lot of information. There is, the system of oppression is so intricate that there is a lot of detail that we don't know. And sometimes we're living it and we don't even know like what the source of it is. But it's yeah, there's a lot to learn continuously.
Yeah. So just a few more questions. A few of them I always ask the guest. What's your message to future leaders, Gen Z specifically? What message do you have for them leading the way?
I mean, I don't want to put too much pressure, but we're counting on them. Honestly, to me, this is the hope that I have. I think, especially when we look at the political leaders now, they're so old school. I'm like, enough. We need the new generation to come in and lead the way. I would say, like, never stop dreaming of that a different world is possible.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, what happens with age, and this is something that I keep struggling against, is that people say, oh, but this is the way it's been and it's not going to change. If we don't dream of change, it will not happen.
Yep. And what would you tell your younger self if you had the chance?
My younger self. Stick with your principles. Don't compromise your values. Which, I think what I've done over the years. But I think a lot of people, at a certain age have to make decisions around, do I want to pursue, a career with, where I make more money, or, it's like this kind of work is not money making basically. But
Yeah,
I also,
trust me, we know.
I know you do. But it's also, it's also a privilege. So I have to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
not everyone has that possibility. But I think, not compromising your values is something that you can do no matter what you're doing. And always have work towards the purpose in life that is your purpose.
Right.
Be in touch with that, basically.
Excellent. And then what do you want your legacy to be 30, 40, 50 years from now? I should maybe say 60, 70 years from now. How about that?
Yeah. I want to have contributed to change. I want to I mean, I don't know. It's such a weird question because I'm like, who am I in the scheme of, but really I want to be remembered as someone who, has worked towards justice and has contributed to a world that is radically different than the world that we're in right now, and I think that's what I've always worked towards. So so someone who's contributed to social justice, I hope, in the small ways that I do, right? Because I think it's a much bigger issue than me, but I think we all play a role, and this is my small role.
Yeah, great. So where can we follow you other than Visualizing Palestine's website? Where can we follow you? Where are you active?
Yeah, so I'm personally not very active on social media, but Visualizing Palestine is our biggest platform is Instagram. So definitely Instagram, because it's a visual, social media, whatever you call it. And we're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and X.
Okay, great.
For now, because I don't know for how much longer with the political environment that we're in.
You may have to move to Threads. Threads is the new X.
I know. Yeah.
So you mentioned, I want people to follow you and learn more about you. Again, just the work that you do is amazing. You mentioned you're going to be on a podcast next week. Do you want to say what podcast, so our audience can listen to that one as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to be on the Build Palestine podcast. It's called Under the Olive Tree. It's going to be next Thursday at 9 a.m.
Awesome. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I know you're busy. I appreciate your time here.
Thank you so much, Ed. So nice to speak to you. Thanks for featuring me.
Of course. Thank you. Have a good one.
Take care.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumúd.